My name is Angela Bradford, and I'll be reviewing a childhood obesity case study during this presentation. The patient is a 14-year-old female who was recently diagnosed as obese by her primary care physician. The physician monitors the patient's weight gain at least once a year during her annual well child visit. It was reported that her weight had been increasing by 6 to 10 pounds each year for the past year, and the physician plotted her BMI above the 95th percentile during her most recent well child visit. The physician referred the patient to a dietitian for a nutrition assessment and weight management counseling. Patient health information that was provided for her family history. Both of her parents were obese. Her mother has hyperlipidemia, and her father has type 2 diabetes mellitus. Her parents reported running out of money for food each month, so their typical intake would be fast food restaurants in an effort to help manage their food costs. A range of medical and psychosocial complications accompany children who are diagnosed as being overweight or obese. Some nutritional implications that I have listed are hypertension, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes mellitus, sleep apnea disorders, orthopedic problems, hepatic disorders. These children usually have body image disturbances and report having lower self-esteem. As these children do age and become adults, they have an increased risk of morbidity and premature mortality from coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes, asthma, and hypertension. Upon review of the patient's medical, family, and social history, there were risk factors identified for her condition. Risk factors were regular consumption of low nutrient, high caloric, dense foods. She typically eats fast food meals for dinner at home. She reported having breakfast each day at home, but those were typically either frozen meals or foods that had not a lot of nutrients and had a lot of sugar and fat and sodium. Her parents reporting that they have financial issues each month and run out of money and aren't able to cover those food costs for them and the children. That's a risk factor for having the low family income. She also reported that she has a sedentary lifestyle. She doesn't participate in school sports activities. And usually when she gets home from school, she said that she will watch television or go and hang out with her friends. There's not any physical activity when she gets home from school. So that sedentary lifestyle is a risk factor. She does have the genetic risk factors of her parents being obese. Parental obesity may increase the risk of obesity through genetic mechanisms, and then also her parents are the ones that are providing the meals at home, and if they're making poor food choices for themselves, they're typically going to provide poor food choices to their children, which increases their risk for obesity. These are all common risk factors for obese children, but if corrected, they can positively impact obesity greatly. During her nutrition assessment, the patient's anthropometrics were provided. Her height was 5'2", and her weight was 152.9 pounds. The patient's body mass index was calculated at 28.0 and plotted on the appropriate CDC growth charts. Her BMI was plotted above the 95th percentile, and children whose BMI are plotted above the 95th percentile are considered obese. The patient provided a 3-day food diary, and her diet mainly consisted of foods that were low nutrient, high calorie, processed foods which contained a lot of fat and sodium. She reported eating 3 meals each day and 1 snack. She did not have any fruits, vegetables, and whole foods. And she also did not report drinking any water. Her regular fluid intake was soda and sweet tea. So that information that she provided for her 3-day food diary was then inputted in a nutrient database. That database provided a nutrients report, and it provided the target ranges for calories, her proteins, her other micronutrients and macronutrients. And those target ranges were also compared to the estimated recommendations done by the dietitian, and the recommendations were following what the daily recommended intake for children her age, girls, teenage girls her age, and also they followed the Institute of Medicine's recommendations. The nutrients report gave information on whether she was over her intake, she was under her intake for these nutrients, or if she met the needs for them. So for her typical intake, she exceeded her caloric and fat needs regularly. She also didn't meet her needs for calcium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. She had a high sodium intake, so that exceeded her sodium recommendations for each day. She also had an adequate fiber intake, and she did regularly meet her needs for carbohydrates, her protein, her linoleic acid, and alpha linoleic acid. Her lab values were provided, and a reference range was given for each lab value. She did have a normal range for sodium, potassium, total cholesterol, and triglycerides. There were borderline acceptable labs, and these borderline acceptable labs are going to be above normal but not extremely high. So those labs were her fasting glucose, her hemoglobin A1C, and her LDL cholesterol. One lab was below the normal range, and that was her HDL cholesterol. These abnormal lab values have poor health implications. Above normal fasting glucose and high hemoglobin A1C are precursors to diabetes mellitus. And then her high LDL cholesterol and low HDL cholesterol are risk factors for developing cardiovascular disease. Nutrition intervention was provided, and one of the recommendations that was made was for her to increase her physical activity, trying to make her physical activity an integral and routine part of her life. Recommendations were for her activity to be increased to 60 minutes a day and decreasing her screen time to less than 2 hours. For her, if she was to increase her physical activity and decrease her screen time, this would help benefit her because it would help her burn those calories that she's intaking, help her to get a higher output of calories to help her to lose her weight, and then get to the point where she can have weight management. Another recommendation was to create a food and beverage environment that ensured healthy food and beverage options are more routine for her. So the main things that were touched on was to increase her dietary fiber, increase her fruit and vegetable intake, decrease her sugary beverages, drink more water each day, and decrease her sugary desserts. Try to replace those desserts with whole fruits and vegetables instead. A 3-day menu was provided for her to try to help her to meet those needs, to follow those recommendations that were given, and then to also make sure she meets each of those macronutrients and micronutrient recommendations, as well as to not exceed her caloric needs to help her to lose weight and eventually get to the point where she can manage her weight. So Some of the foods that I included in her 3-day menu to have a lower fat content would be the non-fat Greek yogurt, which is also high in protein, very filling for her, to help last her through the morning and get her to her lunch at school. Also adding more fruits and vegetables in her diet. You see I have listed 4 medium strawberries on the first day. Small banana is on her day 2 and day 3 menu. Also adding carrots and apples. Another recommendation was to increase her fiber. So I added in some whole wheat bread and brown rice options. Also, a big part of her 3-day menu is providing the serving sizes for her to make sure that she doesn't exceed her caloric needs. Educational handout was provided as well, and the tips on this educational handout fall in line with all the recommendations that were provided during her nutrition intervention. But she would also benefit from printed education materials for healthy meals, preparing meals on a budget, healthy snack ideas, and healthy foods to choose at restaurants. So those type of printed educational handouts can be offered to the patient and given to her if she agrees to receive them. The patient would also benefit from referrals to different federal programs. Her parents reporting that they run out of money regularly each month, which makes them have to choose fast food options to combat those food costs. So a referral to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program would be beneficial. And what her parents would do would be provide their monthly household income, and if they met the guidelines, the SNAP program would provide them with money each month that could be used to purchase food for them. Also, the free or reduced lunch program would be a good option for her, and if they did meet those income guidelines, the program would provide free or reduced lunches for the patient and for her siblings. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.